Hey there, sleepless rabble. Let me take over for a while. You've probably seen her creeping back into your algorithm again. Charlize Theron's vacant stare from Monster. TikToks that somehow turn Florida homicide scenes into mood boards. And now, Netflix's latest true crime buffet. Aileen, queen of the serial killers. It's always the same cycle, isn't it? The internet rediscovers a woman who killed men, and suddenly she's everyone's new obsession. Tragic icon, feminist anti hero, certified meme. But here's the thing Netflix gave you the movie. We're giving you the autopsy. The full body x ray of a life so bruised and broken that even Hollywood had to blur the details. Because Aileen Wuornos wasn't just Florida's first female serial killer, she was 7 headlines, 7 bullets, 7 men who thought they were buying power until they realized the price was their life. Between 1989 and 1990, she turned Florida's highways into a hunting ground. Truckers, salesmen, retired cops. The kind of men who assumed a woman by the roadside was prey, not predator. She flipped that script with a .22 caliber Ruger and a lifetime of rage she didn't know how to put down. When they finally caught her in a biker bar called The Last Resort, which sounds made up but isn't, she didn't cry or beg. She lit a cigarette, smirked, and said, "Yeah, I know the drill." 10 years later, she was executed by lethal injection. Cameras rolling, justice, American style. And now, 2 decades on, she's trending again. Because death, apparently, is just another content format. Before we dive in, though, let's be honest. Stories like this don't survive without noise. Say, murder, execution, or serial killer, and YouTube quietly hides us behind cat videos and influencer skincare routines. We spend nights buried in court transcripts and crime scene reports, and the algorithm still pretends we don't exist. So if you want this kind of story to live, make it loud, hit like, leave a skull emoji, subscribe if you're one of us. The ones who stare into the dark and don't flinch. Alright, sleepless rabble, buckle up. Because to understand how a hitchhiking drifter became America's most infamous female killer, we've got to start long before Florida. Before the bars, before the gun, before the tabloid nicknames. We go back to Michigan, 1956. A winter so sharp it could cut skin. And a baby born on a day that barely exists. You'd have hated it there. Michigan in the 50s wasn't the land of cherry pie and pickup trucks Hollywood likes to sell. It was frozen dirt, grey skies, and the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat too loud. That's where Aileen Carol Wuornos showed up. February 29th, 1956. A leap year baby, already a statistical error. Her arrival didn't come with balloons or hope. It came with resentment. Her mother Diane was 16. Her father Leo was 20 and already on his way to becoming a cautionary tale. Leo Dale Pittman was charming in the way dangerous men often are. A smile too quick, eyes that never stayed still. He was diagnosed schizophrenic, jailed for sex crimes against children, and by 1969, he was found hanging in his cell with a bedsheet. Aileen never met him, but she inherited his chaos like a family heirloom. Her mother didn't last either. At 20, Diane packed up and vanished, left Aileen and her brother Keith with their grandparents. No forwarding address, no goodbye. Aileen grew up believing those grandparents were her real parents. Until one day, during a fight, someone said the wrong thing, and the truth hit like a car crash. Her mother wasn't dead. She'd just deleted her. Her grandfather, Laurie Wuornos, was the kind of man who'd quote scripture with whiskey on his breath. a World War II veteran with a taste for control. He called himself strict. Everyone else called him an asshole when he wasn't in earshot. He beat Aileen, humiliated her, told her she was worthless, a failure of a girl in a world already designed to fail women. Her grandmother Britta drowned the noise in vodka. She didn't stop the violence, she numbed it. When she finally drank herself into the grave, it was probably the kindest thing that ever happened in that house. By 10, Aileen was already feral. Smoking cigarettes, stealing from classmates, setting fires in the woods. Not because she wanted to watch things burn, but because flames were warm and people weren't. She wasn't a rebel. She was starving. School labeled her unmanageable. The neighbors whispered, troublemaker, but nobody ever said the word abused. By 12, she was hustling, trading sex for food, cigarettes, or a lift across town. A child doing adult negotiations just to eat. The town called her fast, but they never asked why she was hungry in the first place. Her brother Keith was the only constant, her co-conspirator in survival. They hid in the woods when things got bad, whispering plans about running away, about being free someday. When it snowed, they slept in an abandoned car. Because frostbite was better than fists. At 14, one of her grandfather's drinking buddies raped her. She got pregnant. The baby was born in a home for unwed mothers, taken away immediately, and never spoken of again. When she came back, her grandfather threw her out. Middle of winter, no coat, no money. She built a campfire in the woods behind the same house that had exiled her. Locals saw smoke through the trees and assumed it was teenagers drinking beer. It wasn't. It was a child trying not to freeze to death. This is the part the documentaries skip, because it's not cinematic. There's no soundtrack for slow starvation, but it's where the story really begins. Aileen didn't grow up. She endured. And in enduring, she learned the first and last rule that would shape her entire life. If no one comes to save you, you stop waiting. You save yourself, or you destroy whatever tries to hurt you first. When you picture a drifter, you probably see a movie version, a restless rebel framed by golden light, hitching rides toward freedom and sunsets. Reality looks different. Reality smells like gasoline, wet asphalt, and motel carpet older than your parents. That's where we find Aileen, 14, half-frozen, living in the woods behind the same house that threw her out. No coat, no money, no plan. Just instinct. And instinct, as she'd already learned, could be weaponized. She slept in an abandoned car. Not metaphorically, literally. A rusted shell that used to be transportation and was now home. Her grandfather sat inside his warm house, probably drinking, probably ranting about the downfall of youth, while the child he'd exiled was setting her own broken fingers against the cold. By the time spring thawed Michigan, she'd already learned the country's first real economy. Men give, girls pay. If she smiled right, she could trade her body for a sandwich, a cigarette, or a ride. It wasn't rebellion, it was math. The police labeled her a known troublemaker, which is the bureaucratic way of saying, we know she exists, but we don't want to deal with her. Disorderly conduct, loitering, petty theft. They booked her, wrote reports, then sent her back to nowhere. No one ever thought to ask why a teenage girl kept getting arrested for existing in public. By 15, she was hitchhiking, not for adventure, but because walking was slower and colder. She drifted through small-town Michigan like static, sleeping in parked cars, empty sheds, and, sometimes, if the universe felt generous, someone's back seat. Each ride was a gamble. Sometimes she got food, sometimes she got assaulted, sometimes both. And somewhere between one ride and the next, she stopped being invisible to men. They noticed her, wanted her, paid her. And the line between survival and transaction blurred until it vanished entirely. She called it road work. The cops called it prostitution. But to Aileen, it was just breathing in a world that charged rent for oxygen. Her brother Keith was the only tether she had left. He joined the army. An escape hatch Aileen could never reach. She adored him, wrote him letters, sometimes pretended he'd come back and rescue her. He never did. In 1976, throat cancer got him first. He was 21. The government sent her a $10,000 insurance payout, and for 2 months, she lived like she'd finally won something. A used car, motel rooms, booze, scratch-offs, comfort in installments. Then the car broke down, she crashed it, and the universe repossessed everything. That same year, she married a man named Louis Gratzfell, a 69-year-old yacht club president from Florida who mistook chaos for charisma. He probably thought he was saving her. She thought she was being upgraded. It lasted 9 weeks. She was arrested for beating him with his own cane. He filed a restraining order. She went back to the road. America's shortest fairy tale. Her rap sheet grew like mold. 1976. DUI and weapons charges. 1981. Armed robbery. She held up a convenience store and made off with $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes. 13 months in prison. Released. Then straight back to the only career that had ever accepted her. The rest of the 80s were a haze of motels and bad lighting, bars with names like the Zodiac and Scoot Inn, jukeboxes that never stopped playing Sky Nerd, and rooms that smelled like mildew and lighter fluid. She drifted down to Florida permanently, not for beaches or sunshine, but because sleeping rough hurts less in the heat. And Florida, as it turns out, is where America stores its ghosts. Some retire there. Some commit felonies. Aileen was both. She became a familiar face to local cops. A highway drifter. A euphemism for disposable human. She was sunburnt, chain-smoking, her voice a gravel pit of nicotine and rage. Men saw her as cheap. Women saw her as trouble. The state saw her as paperwork waiting to happen. Then came Tyria Moore, a hotel maid from Ohio, quiet, soft-spoken, with the kind of patience only heartbreak breeds. They met in a Daytona Beach gay bar in 1986. 2 broken satellites finally colliding. They fell hard, or as hard as 2 people who lived on cigarettes and trauma can fall. They drank together, fought, made up, and called it love. Tyria worked odd jobs. Aileen hustled the highways. Whatever money came in went out faster. When the cash ran out, Aileen went back to the road, to the only transaction she could control. Tyria stayed in the motel, waiting. It was a system, ugly, but functional. If this were a love story, it would end with redemption. But this is America, and our fairy tales come with mugshots. By the late 80s, Aileen was permanently woven into Florida's background noise. The kind of person you pass at a gas station and forget before you hit the freeway. She wasn't a ghost yet, but she was close. Half woman, half warning sign. She still called what she did work. She said she deserved to be treated better. And maybe she did. But by then, the rage had started to congeal. Years of humiliation, violence, hunger, all simmering into something new. She'd spent her whole life waiting to be hurt. And one day, she decided she wouldn't wait anymore. If you drive down a Florida highway at night, you'll notice 2 things. The air never cools, and the darkness isn't really dark. It glows from neon beer signs, gas station floodlights, and the quiet pulse of something rotten just under the surface. That's the world Aileen moved through. The heat never broke, and neither did she. By 1989, she was 43 and running on fumes, sunbaked, nicotine-stained, and convinced she'd been dealt every bad hand in the deck. She called her work road jobs, truck stops, cheap motels, the back seats of cars that smelled like sweat and cheap deodorant. She told herself it was temporary, that she'd hit one lucky streak and get out. But the road doesn't let people like Aileen leave. It just keeps eating them until something finally snaps. And then, it did. November 30th, 1989, Daytona Beach. Aileen flagged down a man named Richard Mallory, 51, electronics store owner, twice divorced, professional creep. He'd been convicted in the late 50s for attempted sexual assault. Something the prosecution would later choose to overlook, because inconvenient truths rarely fit a clean narrative. They drove off together, two ghosts in a rusted car, both thinking they were in charge. 2 days later, hunters found Mallory's body in a wooded area. 4 bullet wounds, 2 to the lungs, 1 to the heart, 1 grazing, a .22 caliber Ruger. His wallet was gone. His car turned up a few counties away. Aileen later claimed he tried to rape her. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Either way, that night changed the chemistry of her brain. Whatever restraint she'd been clinging to, the thin thread separating defense from fury, snapped clean. She told police later she'd shot him in self-defense, buried him under leaves, and walked away. No panic, no plan, just the old familiar silence and the realization that nobody was coming to stop her this time. And once you realize that, it's hard to unlearn. The months that followed blurred together, endless miles of asphalt, cheap liquor, and motel mirrors that reflected a stranger's face. She and Tyria were still orbiting each other, a two-person storm. Aileen brought back cash and stolen goods. Tyria pretended not to ask where they came from. Love, codependency, survival. The holy trinity of doomed relationships. May 1990. David Spears, 47, construction worker. Went missing on May 19th. Naked body found 2 weeks later. 6 bullets, same gun. Neat groupings, all in the torso. Aileen pawned his belongings days later, signing the slip with a fake name and leaving a thumbprint that would later undo her entire life. Then came Charles Carskadden, 40, part-time rodeo hand from Missouri. Shot 9 times. 9. Even by Aileen standards, that was excessive. Police believed he was shot inside his own car. She said he got aggressive. Whatever happened, rage had replaced fear completely by then. Next, Troy Burris, a traveling sausage salesman, and yes, the irony writes itself. July 30th, 1990. Left home for deliveries, never came back. Found 5 days later, 2 gunshot wounds, wallet gone. His truck turned up in another county. Florida's highways were beginning to look like a graveyard map. Then Charles Dick Humphreys, 56, former police chief, Air Force major, and child abuse investigator. Found shot 7 times, clothes still on, wallet missing. Aileen said he threatened her. Maybe he did. Or maybe she couldn't resist the symbolism. A man who spent his life locking up predators, ending up prey to one. Peter Seams was next. 65. Retired missionary driving from Florida to New Jersey. Vanished. Body never found. His car was discovered crashed in Orange Springs. 2 women seen fleeing the scene. One of them sunburned, twitchy, aggressive. A palm print on the door matched Aileen's. And finally, Walter Antonio, 62, reserve police officer, part-time security guard. Found near a logging road in Dixie County, 4 shots, pants around his ankles, car pawned off like scrap metal, 7 men in 11 months. Different towns, same ending. Each pulled off the road by a woman they underestimated, each becoming a headline in the serial killer Hall of Fame. The cops should have seen the pattern sooner. Middle-aged men, same weapon, wallets missing, bodies dumped near highways. But they didn't. Too many counties, too many egos, too much disbelief that a woman could be the monster. By late 1990, Aileen and Tyria were running out of road. They were broke, paranoid, and half-drunk most nights. The motels got cheaper. The air between them got heavier. Still, Aileen kept walking the highways. Thumb out, gun tucked in her bag. Each ride another coin toss. Each man another ghost waiting to happen. And maybe that's the saddest part. She wasn't hunting for thrills. She was running out of ways to survive. Violence was just the last language she spoke fluently. By the end of 1990, Florida's highways were beginning to look haunted. 7 men dead in less than a year, all middle-aged, all shot with the same caliber weapon, all missing wallets, all dumped like bad secrets along the interstate. And still, no one had a clue. You'd think someone would have noticed. But Florida isn't built for noticing. It's built for distraction. Sunshine, strip malls, retirement homes, and crime scenes that bake clean in the heat. Different counties, different sheriffs, different headlines. Nobody was talking to anyone else. Until someone did. The first real clue came not from DNA or witness accounts, but from a pawn slip. A wedding ring belonging to David Spears. Pawned for a few dollars at a local shop just days after his murder. The name on the receipt was fake, but the thumbprint wasn't. When they ran it through the system, the computer lit up like a Christmas tree. Aileen Wuornos, age 34. Aliases, Cami Marsh Green, Laurie Grody, Lee. Record, theft, assault, armed robbery, vagrancy, obstruction. A career criminal without a career, and suddenly, the most wanted woman in Florida. It was almost poetic. After years of being invisible, she'd finally made the system pay attention, just not in the way she'd hoped. Then came another hit. A palm print from the door of Peter Seams's crashed car. Matched perfectly. 2 prints, 2 murders, 1 woman. Add the mysterious girlfriend witnesses kept mentioning, and suddenly, the cops weren't chasing a lone drifter. They were hunting a duo. The press went feral. The words practically wrote themselves. Lethal lovers, the damsels of death, Florida's female serial killers. They didn't care about truth. They cared about clicks. And Florida loves a good spectacle. Behind the headlines, a task force quietly formed, a Frankenstein collaboration between multiple counties who didn't like sharing credit, but liked unsolved murders even less. They called themselves the Central Florida Investigators Group, and for the first time, they started to connect the dots. Pawn slips, car thefts, motel records. A pattern emerged. Not subtle, not genius, just neglected. Meanwhile, Aileen was still doing what she always did. Drinking, bragging, surviving. She haunted a biker bar in Port Orange called The Last Resort. Locals described her as loud, mean, and always talking about killing somebody. Nobody took her seriously. Florida bars are full of people making confessions that sound like jokes. So, the cops went undercover. One officer played a Barley, another posed as a potential client. They bought her drinks, earned her trust, and waited for her to slip. But Aileen wasn't stupid. Paranoid, yes, but not stupid. She'd lived too long on the edge not to smell danger. So instead, they went after the one person who still mattered to her, Tyria. By January 1991, Tyria had already fled back to Ohio. She was scared and probably knew more than she ever wanted to. The cops found her easily, promised immunity, and offered her a deal straight out of the devil's playbook. Help us catch Aileen, and we'll make sure you disappear. They set her up in a motel room with a phone and told her to call. 3 days of recorded conversations followed. Awkward, emotional, and gut-wrenchingly human. Tyria played her role well. Frightened, fragile, desperate. Aileen stayed guarded at first, but you could hear the guilt leaking through the cracks. Then, on the 3rd day, the dam broke. "I'm the one who did it, honey," Aileen said softly. "You just gotta tell them you didn't know." And that was it. The confession they needed, gift wrapped in heartbreak. January 9th, 1991. The Last Resort Bar. Aileen was drinking alone, camouflage jacket, cigarette in hand. When the cops surrounded her, she didn't scream or fight. She just looked up, exhaled smoke, and muttered, "Yeah, I know the drill." Outside, the Florida sun was painfully cheerful, the kind of day where the humidity clings to your teeth. Inside, they cuffed the most infamous female killer in the state's history. The manhunt was over, but the spectacle was just beginning. Because in America, catching the monster is only step 1. Step 2 is selling her story. And with Aileen, business was about to boom. After the arrest came the silence, the kind that hums inside fluorescent rooms where clocks don't tick. Aileen Wuornos had finally said the words the cops wanted to hear. "I'm the one who did it." But confessions aren't always relief. Sometimes they're just the sound of a life folding in on itself. When detectives told her Tyria was cooperating, she didn't cry or scream. She didn't flip the table, didn't beg, didn't even curse. She just blinked, slowly, and asked for another cigarette. That's when they knew they had her. From the outside, it looked like victory. A clean arrest, a confession, a headline ready for print. But inside that interrogation room, something far uglier was happening. Aileen wasn't broken yet. She was unraveling. She started talking to everyone, reporters, guards, lawyers, strangers, anyone with a notepad or a microphone. She told her story in loops, one day full of regret, the next full of rage. Some days she said the killings were self-defense, that each man had attacked her, that she was fighting for her life. And maybe, for some of them, that was true. For others, she didn't even bother pretending. Her words twisted like smoke, half-truths, delusions, survival logic. To one interviewer, she said, "They'd have killed me first." To another, "They deserved it." And to yet another, "I hate men. I'd do it again every time." Her tone changed, as if she were auditioning for different roles in her own tragedy. The press ate it up. They always do. A female serial killer, that alone was enough to sell front pages. The highway hooker. The damsel of death. The woman who looked like everyone's bitter ex and talked like the devil's bartender. They didn't care who she was. They cared how she sounded. And Aileen gave them sound bites for days. Between interviews, she started seeing patterns. Faces in the walls, voices through the vents. She told guards that the prison was zapping her brain with something she called sonic pressure. She said they were poisoning her food, turning her against God, controlling her thoughts. When a psychiatrist tried to prescribe medication, she refused. "God's my lawyer now," she said. It would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. The psychologist who evaluated her diagnosed borderline personality disorder, PTSD, and antisocial traits. She'd lived through decades of trauma, abandonment, abuse, sexual violence. And now, finally, she'd gone full circle. Punished not for her damage, but for what it had turned her into. Florida doesn't mind executing the mentally ill. It just prefers them stable enough to say, thank you. Through all the paranoia, one name kept circling back. Tyria. She asked about her constantly. Was she safe? Did she hate her? Had she moved on? Reporters wrote it off as obsession. But it wasn't that simple. Tyria was the only person Aileen had ever loved, or believed she had. When Tyria betrayed her, it wasn't just a broken heart. It was the last crack in a lifetime of fractures. So Aileen talked louder, smoked faster. Her interviews became unpredictable. 1 minute scripture, the next profanity. Sometimes she smiled like she was in on a cosmic joke. Sometimes she went quiet for whole minutes, eyes unfocused, as if listening to something only she could hear. And through it all, the world watched. Through glass, through cameras, through the smug certainty that she was a monster. No one saw the exhaustion, the collapse under the weight of her own myth. By the time her trial date was set, she wasn't just a suspect anymore. She was a national story. America's first female serial killer, televised, dissected, commodified. The state would call it justice. The networks would call it content. And Aileen, she just called it noise. Because after the confession came the real punishment. Not death, not prison, but being watched until there was nothing human left to see. By the time Aileen finally stood trial in January 1992, Florida had already decided what she was. Not a woman, not a victim, a villain. The kind the evening news could package neatly between weather and sports. Daytona Beach was the perfect setting for it. A city that smelled of suntan oil and stale beer. A place where every story eventually turns into a sideshow. The courthouse sat there like an exhausted preacher, all marble and bad lighting, pretending that this was justice, not entertainment. Aileen sat at the defense table, shoulders tense beneath a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit. Her hair had been brushed into submission, but her eyes gave her away. Restless, unpredictable, the gaze of someone who had seen too much to care about what came next. She'd been in a cell for a year, interrogated, analyzed, dissected. Now she was here to be paraded, and she knew it. The prosecution treated the trial like opening night. They painted her as a cold, calculating predator, a woman who hunted men the way men were supposed to hunt women. They spoke in simple, satisfying binaries. Good versus evil, victim versus killer, Florida versus the devil. Every word was rehearsed, every exhibit presented like a prop. There was the .22 Ruger gleaming under the lights, the porn slips, neat and damning, the photographs, still and obscene in their banality. They played her taped confession to the jury, her voice projected across the room like a sermon from hell. She sounded tired, resigned, and that, more than anything, sealed her fate. The jury didn't need to understand her. They just needed to hear that tone. Her defense team tried to tell another story, one about trauma and hunger, and a life that had never once offered safety. They talked about abuse and mental illness, about the psychology of survival, about how a woman who'd been violated since childhood might eventually mistake fear for intent. The experts used words like borderline and post-traumatic, But words like that don't land in courtrooms built for absolutes. To the jurors, she wasn't broken, she was dangerous. And Florida doesn't pity dangerous women. When the verdict came, it took less time than it takes to finish a cup of bad coffee. Guilty of first-degree murder. The judge leaned forward, looking almost pleased to be part of history, and declared her the most dangerous woman the court has ever seen. The cameras caught her expression perfectly. Not rage, not fear, just a kind of weary amusement. Then she gave him what the tabloids would replay for decades. May your wife and kids get raped in the ass. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't madness. It was defiance, pure and unfiltered. The final middle finger of someone who had run out of performances to give. In the months that followed, she pled guilty to 6 more murders. There was no theatre this time, just signatures and silence. 6 guilty pleas, 6 death sentences. Florida's judicial system had never moved so efficiently. Somewhere, an attorney probably toasted to it. The press called her the female Ted Bundy, a headline that fit neatly on a magazine cover. Reporters scrambled for interviews, and the public couldn't get enough of her contradictions. A woman who prayed to God one day and cursed him the next, who wept in one moment and bragged in another. To them, she was entertainment. Part monster, part morality play, part tragedy written for syndication. Through it all, she sat under the buzzing fluorescent lights, chain-smoking, watching her own mythology expand beyond her control. The courtroom became a circus tent. The world, its audience. She could almost hear the applause every time a newspaper called her evil, and in a way, she played along. After a lifetime of invisibility, being the monster at least meant being seen. When the gavel finally fell, the crowd dispersed. The journalists packed up their microphones, and Florida congratulated itself on a job well done. The system had spoken. The monster had been captured. Order had been restored. But for Aileen, there was no order, just the same static that had followed her since childhood. She was going back to a cage now, but this one was cleaner, more official, lined with paperwork and air conditioning. It almost looked like peace, if you didn't look too long. The state called it justice. The media called it closure. And somewhere behind those courthouse walls, a woman who had never once been believed quietly accepted that, for the first time in her life, someone had finally listened. Not to her truth, but to her noise. Florida's death row is not dramatic. It isn't gothic or cinematic or haunted in the way movies like to pretend. It's fluorescent. That's the real horror. Lights that never switch off. Air that smells of bleach and recycled despair. The sound of the metal doors sliding shut, always a second too slow, like the state itself is thinking, is this really what we do? And then doing it anyway. Aileen's cell measured 6 feet by 9. It looked more like storage than punishment. A white box with a steel bed, a toilet, and a mirror polished enough to reflect regret but not enough to show a face clearly. She called it the box. The guards called her Lee. They also called her unpredictable. And they weren't wrong. In the beginning, she talked constantly, compulsively to anyone who would listen. Reporters, guards, her reflection. She spoke in stories that looped like skipping records. Some days she preached, quoting scripture with the authority of a woman who'd met God personally and wasn't impressed. Other days she cursed the walls until her throat gave out. The quiet was worse. Silence for Aileen had never been kind. She still did interviews, too many maybe. Some were exploitative. Some tried to humanize her. None really succeeded. To one journalist, she said the state was trying to drive her crazy before killing her. To another, she insisted she was sane. Hell, I'm saner than half the people out there, she said, half laughing. You'd go mad too if you'd lived my life. And for a second, the reporter didn't know whether to agree or to pray. Her paranoia became legend inside those walls. She believed the guards were spitting in her food, that the prison was pumping her cell with sonic pressure, invisible waves designed to fry her mind before the execution. She accused the staff of tampering with her coffee, her toothbrush, her soap. Some laughed. Others stopped meeting her eyes. Even the doctors eventually gave up on her medication. She refused everything anyway. "God's my lawyer now," she said. A line equal parts defiance and exhaustion. Over the years, her body changed. Her face softened, her hair went grey. The hard edges of her anger blurred into something quieter. Not peace, exactly, but fatigue. She'd sit on her bunk, smoking invisible cigarettes long after the real ones were banned, muttering to people who weren't there. Sometimes she'd pray. Sometimes she'd joke that she was already halfway dead. So the state was just finishing paperwork. Even her humour sounded tired. The only person she still trusted was Nick Broomfield, the British filmmaker who'd been recording her since the early 90s. He saw the change firsthand. From sharp defiance to this eerie calm that didn't feel like acceptance so much as erasure. She'd gone from wanting to be heard to wanting to stop existing. When he asked if she had any hope left, she smiled the way people do when they've already written the ending. "I'm ready to leave this planet," she said. That line wasn't metaphor, it was application language. In Florida, you can waive your appeals if you're lucid enough to do it. Aileen was very lucid. She'd stopped fighting, stopped giving interviews to anyone who wanted to understand her. She didn't believe in a redemption anymore. Not through faith, not through fame. She just wanted it done. The court agreed. An execution date was set for October 9th, 2002. After 10 years of headlines, interviews, and legal delays, the story that had fed so many finally had an ending. Florida loves closure almost as much as it loves spectacle. On the night before, the guard said she slept. No pacing, no yelling, no hymns echoing down the corridor. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that isn't peace, but surrender. When dawn came, the humidity already thick enough to drown in, she was led down the corridor. White shirt, blue prison pants, no shoes. Someone offered her makeup. She declined. "Who's it for?" she asked. And really, who was it for? Her final meal request was coffee. Black, no sugar, nothing else. She said she didn't need food where she was going. At 9:30 a.m., the witnesses filed in. Journalists, prison officials, a childhood friend named Dawn Botkins, who still believed there was something worth forgiving. They sat behind the glass. Aileen was strapped to the gurney, her face unreadable, her eyes bright and terrifyingly calm. When asked if she had any last words, she spoke clearly. "I'd just like to say, I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back." No one knew what that meant. It didn't matter. It was prophecy, punchline, and middle finger all at once. At 9:47 a.m., the first chemical entered her veins. By the time the second one followed, she was gone. No gasp, no struggle, just silence and fluorescent light. Outside, the crowd erupted, some praying, some cheering, some holding signs that said justice for the victims. It looked less like a moral reckoning and more like a tailgate party for the apocalypse. The reporters filed their stories by noon. "Monster executed in Florida." The same headline they'd written 100 times before. Not woman, not human being, Monster! Her ashes were given to Dawn, who scattered them in Michigan under a grey sky, near a field where Aileen used to run as a kid. No grave, no marker, just dirt, wind, and the echo of a life that had been a warning before it was ever a story. Death is supposed to be an ending. In America, it's a licensing opportunity. Aileen was barely gone before the cameras shuffled back to their marks, cables coiled like vipers on the floor, everyone speaking in that hushed tone people adopt when they want moral credit for staring at a body. The state had finished its part. Now it was time for the industry to do what it does best. Transform a life into inventory. Nick Broomfield went first, because of course he did. He'd been there for years. The peculiar British witness who managed to stay just enough outside the spectacle to see it clearly. His film, Aileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer, arrived in 2003 like a postscript written in a steady hand. It didn't ask you to forgive her. It asked you to look at her without the tabloid filter, to hear the unedited weather of her mind, the paranoia, the defiance, the exhausted humor that kept showing up like a stray cat. He called her America's Frankenstein, which was right in a way that made everyone uncomfortable, not because she was stitched together from corpses, but because she'd been assembled by a village that refused to claim its workmanship. Then Hollywood did what Hollywood always does. It took the mess, ironed the edges, and fed it to an audience that wanted to feel something big without having to sit with something complicated. Monster landed later that same year with the weight of a cultural event. Charlize Theron disappeared into Aileen so completely that people forgot to be surprised when the Academy gave her an Oscar for it. They were too busy clapping for the transformation. Eyebrows shaved, weight gained, gestures learned from tapes and transcripts. A miracle of mimicry that turned one woman's ruin into another woman's coronation. Theron thanked Aileen in interviews, said she hoped the film honoured her. Maybe it did. But the person it benefited most was the one still alive to accept applause. The movie found empathy without absolution, which is to say, it pulled you in, then let you back out in time for credits. It softened the jagged parts just enough to protect the viewer from splinters. It made a legend legible. That's not a crime. It's a craft. But it's also a form of embalming. You can respect a body more easily after it stops moving. And once a story gets the prestige treatment, it becomes evergreen. Podcasts spun up by the dozen, each promising a fresh angle, as if the angles weren't all looking at the same photographs. Then came the carousel of true crime docuseries, each more polished than the last. Slow-motion shots of highways at dusk, tasteful piano, B-roll of police files sliding out of manila folders like secrets were gravity-fed. In the background, the same details rearranged, the same witnesses repeating lines that had calified into folklore. Aileen's face became the logo for a feeling. If you lingered too long on any one version, you could hear the pitch deck behind it. By the time TikTok got involved, the canon had gone postmodern. Clips of Theron's performance cross-faded with the real mugshots, set against audio that had nothing to do with any of it. A soft piano loop, a moody bass line, an algorithm humming to itself like a god that forgot it was one. People posted comments that read like confessionals. I feel bad for her, but also scared. She's iconic. She's evil. She's both. The app didn't care which way you leaned. It only cared that you didn't look away. Back in Port Orange, at the last resort, the biker bar where the arrest finally stuck, the afterlife was less abstract. They hung her photo on the wall and left it there, held in a frame that taught tourists where to stand for the best angle. A shotgun above the counter, beer that tastes like memory loss, a t-shirt or two, a knowing grin from the bartender when someone asks for the story. Every so often, a reporter flies in, orders something domestic, writes the same piece with the new adjectives. Inside the bar where a serial killer was caught, the locals shrug, the register sings, the pilgrimage continues. If you squint, you can call it commemoration. If you don't, you call it commerce. The distinction matters less than we'd like. There's a sequence you can watch if you know where to look. Courtroom footage dissolving into documentary interviews, which dissolve into Theron's monologues, which dissolve into side-by-sides comparing actor to subject, which dissolve into people rating their favorite true crime films out of 10. The arc is smooth, frictionless, eerily humane. It lets you feel that you've done the work of understanding when you've mostly done the work of consuming. The machines that make meaning and the machines that make money hum in tune for once. Everybody wins except the people who don't exist anymore. And maybe that's the strangest part of her afterlife. How tidy it is. The living get roles, director, critic, influencer, pilgrim at the bar, while the dead get edited into coherence. Aileen, who never fit anywhere when she was breathing, fits easily now into shelves and playlists. Female serial killers, monsters we made, why she snapped. Even the cautionary tales sound pre-packaged, like they arrived stamped and sealed from a warehouse that manufactures moral clarity. I'm not saying the films and essays and podcasts shouldn't exist. We make stories because we want to understand what breaks in the world and what breaks in us. But if you listen closely, past the strings and the narration, you can hear a quieter rhythm. The cash register in the bar, the click of a play button, the soft applause that follows a transformation on stage. It doesn't make the empathy fake. It makes it complicated, which is another way of saying it makes it human. What we rarely do, what we almost never do, is hold the whole thing at once. The 7 men whose names don't trend unless someone lists them quickly to prove they remember. The girl in the woods keeping a fire lit to stay alive. The woman in the courtroom too tired to pretend she cared about the choreography of remorse. The state that killed her because it could. The director who kept filming because he thought the truth might be inside the contradiction. The actress who built an altar to the performance and was rewarded for it. The bar that sells beer under a photograph. The comment section that tries to decide if she was a monster or a mirror. As if those two can't sometimes be the same thing. If you want a neat conclusion, I can give you the one the market prefers. That stories like this remind us not to judge too quickly, or that trauma doesn't excuse violence, or that justice is complicated but necessary. All of that can be true. It can also be a lullaby we sing to ourselves so we can sleep after the credits. Here's a different ending. The afterlife of Aileen Wuornos is a room with 2 doors that never quite close. Through one door, she's the cautionary tale that keeps girls from hitchhiking. Through the other, she's the indictment of a system that only notices the poor when they make good villains. In the middle of the room is the camera, blinking red, indifferent, faithful. It will outlive all of us. It will keep watching long after we stop asking what we're looking at. And somewhere back in Michigan, if you stand in the right field on the right grey afternoon, you can almost feel the wind moving over a place where a child used to run. No plaque, no cross, nothing to tell you why the air suddenly feels heavier. Just the sensation that something happened here, and then kept happening, until there was no one left to hold it. The bar will still be open tomorrow. The films will still stream. The playlist will keep shuffling her name between others. That's the afterlife media promised us. Not heaven or hell, but syndication, a rerun that refuses to end. If you drive down South Ridgewood Avenue in Port Orange, you'll pass a line of weather-beaten storefronts, half-broken neon, and the steady hum of humidity that never takes a day off. You might not even notice the Last Resort bar until you're right in front of it. The paint's faded, the sign's crooked. It looks like 100 other Florida dive bars, but it's the only one where tourists lower their voices when they walk in. Inside, the air smells like beer, bleach, and something older. The kind of scent that clings to walls after decades of stories told too loud and too late. There's a jukebox in the corner, still swallowing quarters, still playing songs that sound like they've been looping since 1989. And above the counter, in a black frame slightly tilted to the right, is the face. Aileen. Mugshot, mid-sentence, mouth caught between smirk and surrender. The photo never comes down. It's the bar's most reliable employee. Tourists order drinks beneath it, half whispering to the bartenders like they're confessing. Is that really where they caught her? The bartender nods. Every bartender here knows the lines, a script polished by repetition. Yes, this is where the cops came. Yes, she was drinking beer, smoking a cigarette. No, she didn't run. Yes, that's the stool she sat on. No, you can't take pictures with your flash on. But they always do. Every few minutes, the front door creaks open and another small pilgrimage enters. True crime fans, film students, couples on vacation pretending they just happen to stop by. They look around with that same mix of reverence and discomfort, like they've walked into a church they don't believe in, but don't want to offend. They take photos. They order t-shirts. They drink a beer for the dead, and another for the story. On the wall, a shotgun hangs above her photo, part decoration, part commentary. Some call it irony. Some call it bad taste. In Florida, it's both. The locals have learned to live with it. To them, the bar is just the bar. They drink their drafts, play their pool, and watch tourists stumble through the door with the same bemused tolerance you'd reserve for a strange but harmless religion. Once a month, a journalist drops by, notebook ready, headline pre-written, inside the dive bar that caught a killer. The bartender gives them a few quotes, shrugs, and goes back to wiping glasses. Nothing here changes, except the tourists. Outside, someone always poses under the sign for a selfie. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they try to look haunted. The photo goes up on Instagram, tagged #TrueCrimeTour or #MonsterBar. The captions are all the same. Having one for Aileen. The likes roll in. The algorithm hums. The story stays profitable. That's the strange thing about the Last Resort. It's both graveyard and gift shop. Every square foot is curated tragedy. The bar doesn't exploit her exactly. It just doesn't let her die. The jukebox plays, the cash register rings, and somewhere in the static between, her ghost sells another round. There's a kind of poetry in that, if you squint. Not the pretty kind. The kind carved out of cynicism and capitalism, and whatever emotion sits halfway between empathy and appetite. We come to places like this because we want to feel close to the darkness, but not too close. We want to sip it, not swallow it. Some nights, when the humidity presses against the windows and the highway hums like a distant animal, people say you can feel something in the air. Not haunted, more like charged. As if the story hasn't finished burning out yet. As if every retelling, every flash photograph, keeps her orbiting just a few inches above the bar top, suspended between myth and marketing. And that's what she's become now. A brand. Not through malice, not even through design, but through inertia. The world needed her to keep performing long after she stopped breathing. So it does the performing for her. Her name appears on t-shirts and shot glasses. Podcasters drop it in episode titles to boost engagement. Netflix builds algorithms that recommend her story to you the moment you pause too long on a thumbnail. Aileen Wuornos has become searchable, sortable, monetizable. Her life, once ignored, then condemned, now exists as content, infinitely replicable, perfectly indexed. In a way, that's the neatest punishment of all. The woman who once hated being invisible will never vanish again. The system that never saw her alive now refuses to stop showing her face. And we keep watching, because that's what we do when something terrible starts to look familiar enough to be comfortable. If you stand outside the last resort after midnight, you can still hear the jukebox thudding through the walls, distorted, half drowned by the hum of the highway. The same song loops every night. A strange lullaby for a state that never sleeps. Cars rush past, their headlights sweeping across the old wood siding like ghosts making another pass. And for a moment, if you let the air thicken around you, you can almost imagine her, sitting at the bar again, cigarette smoke curling toward the ceiling fan, the same tired half smile on her face, still waiting for her next line, still being performed by everyone who came after. There's a certain kind of quiet that follows a story like this. Not peace, not closure, just the sound of exhaustion. The headlines fade, the documentaries stop trending, the podcasts move on to fresher tragedies, and still, her face hangs there in the background like static on an old TV. Even when you're not watching, it hums. Aileen Wuornos has become part of the cultural wallpaper, a woman too damaged to be saved, too infamous to be forgotten. Her story slips between empathy and exploitation so smoothly that most people don't notice the difference anymore. They call her tragic, monstrous, iconic, misunderstood, adjectives arranged like filters to soften the glare of what really happened. Each label is a kind of leash. None of them fit. The truth is simpler and messier. Aileen was a product of a country that doesn't build safety nets, only trapdoors. A child thrown away by her family, swallowed by poverty, spat out by every institution that promised to help. She was shaped by cruelty until cruelty became her only language. That doesn't make her a hero. It makes her proof. And the proof is uncomfortable, because the same system that let her fall in silence found its voice when she started pulling the trigger. Suddenly there was funding, attention, headlines, documentaries, an Oscar. We pay more to memorialize violence than to prevent it. We study her pathology, but not the conditions that produced it. It's easier to watch the flames than to talk about what kept feeding them. When she said, "I'm sailing with the rock," it sounded insane. But maybe that was just translation. The only way she could articulate the relief of finally leaving a world that never made space for her. She wasn't promising revenge or resurrection. She was promising rest. And that, for someone who never had any, was a kind of faith. The irony, of course, is that she didn't get it. Even in death, she's still working, still being dissected, dramatized, looped in montages for people who will never know the cold Michigan air or the smell of motel curtains in summer. The machine keeps running because her face still sells curiosity. We call it awareness. It looks a lot like consumption. But legacy isn't always what the world says it is. Sometimes it's smaller. Sometimes it's a single moment that refuses to leave you. A sentence that sticks like splintered glass. Maybe it's her sitting alone in that bar, smoke curling upward, eyes flat with exhaustion, saying, "Yeah, I know the drill." Or maybe it's the younger version, the kid in the woods behind her grandfather's house, keeping a fire alive through another Michigan night, determined not to freeze. That's the image that matters. Because that's where the story really began. Not with murder, but with a child learning what it takes to survive in a place that doesn't care if she does. If you listen closely to her interviews, past the rants, past the paranoia, there are moments when she sounds almost clear. Everybody's got their breaking point, she says. And she's right. Most people just reach theirs in quieter rooms, under better lighting, with someone nearby to clean up the mess. When we talk about legacy, we like it tidy. We want the arc. Trauma, downfall, punishment, lesson. But life doesn't bend that neatly. Sometimes it just circles. Sometimes it spirals until it collapses under its own weight, and all we can do is watch, horrified and fascinated, trying to convince ourselves that understanding equals absolution. There's no neat moral here, no comfortable lesson to take home. Aileen's story isn't a warning, or a manifesto, or a mystery solved. It's just one more reminder that monsters rarely start as strangers. They start as children. And by the time we notice, it's always too late to ask what could have gone differently. If you drive those same Florida highways now, they look the same as they did then. Flat, endless, shimmering under the heat. Gas stations, pine trees, roadkill, maybe a woman walking along the shoulder. Thumb out, hair wild in the wind. You'll tell yourself it's just your imagination. You'll turn up the radio, roll up the windows, and keep driving. Because the truth of Aileen Wuornos isn't in the documentaries or the mugshots or the hashtags. It's in that uneasy feeling that sticks with you afterward. That low hum of recognition. The quiet understanding that what happened to her didn't begin with her. It began with everything around her. And maybe that's the real horror. That it could happen again, anywhere, and the story would still end the same way. A headline, a photo, a playlist, a bar, a brand, a ghost. So if you're still awake, sleepless rabble, close your eyes. The story's over, but the echo never really stops. It just fades, like a highway at night, disappearing behind you in the rearview mirror. And that sleepless rabble was the story. If you've made it this far, you've just walked through 46 years of violence, hunger, rage, and survival that never found a soft place to land. A life built out of collisions, between neglect and need, between cruelty and consequence, between the things people do to stay alive and the price they pay for doing them. Aileen Wuornos isn't a morality tale, though people keep trying to make her one. She's not the face of evil or the symbol of feminism or the ghost of every bad decision America ever made. She's just proof that some lives burn at a higher voltage. Too bright, too chaotic, too uncontained to fade quietly. And when that kind of life ends, it doesn't stop. It reverberates. You can still feel it in the way the media replays her words like hymns, in the endless remakes and retellings, in the comments that still argue over whether she was a victim or a monster. She's become both, because that's how the world digests discomfort. We turn it into narrative, we file it under true crime, we press play, and in doing so, we keep her orbiting, just beyond reach. If this story left you heavy, good. It should. It's not here to entertain you. It's here to haunt you just enough that you look at the next headline, the next mugshot, the next forgotten name, and remember that behind every public horror, there's a private history that went unnoticed until it was too late. We stay up half the night, piecing these stories together. Not because we enjoy the darkness, but because we believe someone should at least turn on a light. If you want that light to keep burning, help it. Like, comment, subscribe. Not for me, for the truth that gets buried under algorithms and comfort. The machine only listens when there's noise, and you, sleepless rabble, are the noise that keeps it from falling silent. So until the next story, sleep if you can, dream if you dare, and remember, the past doesn't rest. It just waits for someone to notice it again. This is Napmax Sleep Stories, and you've been listening to the Aileen Wuornos case, The Killing Highway. Now close your eyes and let the ghosts do the talking.